Now this pattern is going to be the Brown Bumble. It's kind of a fun little pattern to tie. We're going to start out, I've got a 14, it's actually a dry hook here in the vise, and I'm just using 18-aught nano silk. I'm just going to take this thread back to about where the barb would be. If this wasn't a barbless hook. I'm just going to bring that part way back up, and we're going to go ahead and reach for our first material. And our first material we're going to use on this one is going to be a golden pheasant. Wonderful looking feather with this particular pattern. We're going to use this for our tail. And what I do when I'm using this, because it's really obviously important to keep this in alignment if you want to keep those bands kind of where they are laying currently. So I'll usually grab the tips of the bunch that I'm going to cut off, and I'm just going to hold them tight, and then I'm just going to make a cut straight across the material here. That should do us fine. So lengthwise, I want a little bit of that black showing through, so I'm just going to go ahead and pinch these together a little bit and make sure where that black is going to show. Take a wrap or two just to make sure that we've got about the length that we want here. And make it a tiny little bit longer, but not much. And we're just going to go ahead and take some thread wraps back to where we're going to start the abdomen of this pattern. Once I've got those pretty much locked in place, then I'm just going to move my thread back up forward, and we'll use that balance of feather there to just add a little bulk as we're working on the taper. Just means I have to use a little bit less thread to get that taper because I've already got some bulk built into it. I'm just going to cut off these butt ends here. Now that we've got our butt ends cut off, got our tail kind of placed, I'll just go ahead and clean up a little by taking a few wraps over those butt ends. Not critically important, it's more my OCD. One thing that I've recognized as I've been tying is I misspeak a lot, so make sure you watch at the beginning of the video the materials that are being used. I can't tell you how many times I have referred to ostrich plume as a peacock herl, even though I know in my head exactly what it is and what I'm tying on and staring at, but I think maybe it's an age thing. I'm hoping so. Well, actually I'm not hoping so, because I don't want to go too much further downhill than that. Our next material, I'm just going to tie this into the side, and I'm using some French oval tinsel, and this is silver. I'm just going to take a few wraps, and then I'm going to pull it backwards or draw it back, like I usually say, to about where I want the abdomen to start. That'll just save you a little bit on your materials, but it will also make it so you don't have to cut it off. So we've got that far, and we're going to go ahead and move back towards the back end, and we're going to tie in some dubbing. And what I like to use on this pattern is I'm going to mix together, this is Awesome Possum. Awesome Possum. There we go. And I'm going to use a rusty orange, because this is kind of meant to be more of a reddish pattern. So I'm just going to take myself a little bit of the dubbing out like that. But I'm also going to mix in just a tiny little bit of the burnt orange, just to make this a little bit brighter and a little bit closer to red. So there's my orange and my red, or my rusty orange. Set that aside. There's a good chance we'll have to come back to that. I'm just going to go ahead and mix this a little bit in my fingers, just by pulling it apart and putting it back together. And then what I'm going to do is just kind of spread this out so it's ready to go on a dubbing loop. And basically all I do is try to make it a little bit sparse and longer. And then from there, we'll go ahead and put ourselves a nice little dubbing noodle on here, or dubbing rope. Just using my fingers. I haven't waxed anything here. And usually what I'll do is just like this. I'll kind of get it started, just like that. And I see that it's not all the way back where I want the abdomen to start, but what I do have is I have some pretty vacant thread space right here, which gives me the ability to kind of move backwards without actually laying much, if any, dubbing down at all. And then once I get here to the back, I'm going to tighten that up. And I want to make sure I have one good wrap right around the butt ends of that golden pheasant tail. And then I'll just reach in as I'm making my turns with this dubbing and tighten it down a little bit. And we are going to want this tapered. Not like major taper, but we certainly want it fatter up towards the eye than we want it towards the tail, where we want it a little thinner. So I'm going to keep working my way up. And hopefully you can see the taper that we've kind of built in to our fly here at this point. Because we're going to put a hack, we're using a couple of soft hackles here on this pattern. And it ties pretty close right up to the eye. So I'm okay with my dubbing sneaking up a little bit further than what maybe we're used to doing. So once I'm up here, I'm just going to go ahead and move back a little bit. I can see I got some little stragglers there. You can pull them back. Or you can pick them out a little bit later if that's what you want to do. I do that from time to time as well with tweezers. And so that's how we're sitting right now. I'm going to go ahead and grab a dubbing brush here and just brush out a little bit of the hairs here. Not a lot, just a little bit, just to give me a hint. I'm doing that now because I'm about ready to put on a soft hackle, and I don't want to be doing this when the soft hackle is laid down, because it will just most likely just break your soft hackle off. So you want to do that operation before you move on to your soft hackle. So I'll usually use, for the first soft hackle is going to be kind of a reddish color. I'm colorblind, so that doesn't help me much, but this is more of that fire. So I've gone ahead and found myself a feather. This is going to be a soft hackle here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to strip this fuzzy stuff off, and you can just kind of pinch it and then pull backwards, and that stuff will come right off for you. Give you a bare stem, and that's what we're going to be tying with. So I should be left with a pretty nice little hackle feather here that's more of that brown, and you can see the bare stem, and that's where we're going to kind of tie this in. Get my oval tinsel out of the way that wants to follow. I always have material that just really wants to follow me along. So I'm going to tie this in with the curve facing towards the lens. The shiny part is facing towards me. And I want to make sure I tie it in about where I want to start this hackle moving backwards. So that's going to work. For me, I'm going to go ahead and move forward just a hair here. And then, like I always do, I'm going to rotate my vise just a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and cut off the balance of that stem. Just clean things up a little bit. You can see the jaws open and close. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach those to the tip end of this feather that's streaming out towards the back end of the hook. And then I'm going to hold this straight up in the air. So the blessing and the curse I was talking about is, if for whatever reason I screw up or break something off, I can't just undo the thread and remove the material because I put a knot in. But there are other ways to recover, so that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I want to make sure that my first turn here is all the way around. And then we're just going to start working back using fairly open wraps of the material. And you'll note as we get closer to the point of that hook, and this is a good hook, it is just eager to catch the shaft of that feather and break it off. So you've got to be really careful with that. So you'll see when I come around this end, I'll kind of pull it out around it and go back just about like that. And while I've got it like that, I do need to keep the tension on. Otherwise, all of that hackle will just come unwrapped and we'll just do it again, which is okay. I do that all the time. So now I'm going to just grab my silver tinsel, that silver oval that wanted to follow me everywhere, and now I can't get it loose. So here it is. And we're actually going to use this to tie that hackle into place. So I'm going to take one good wrap there around the back, and I'm going to pull that fairly tight, which you can do because it is metal. From there I can actually let go with my hackle pliers and work my way up the abdomen here of the fly here, trying to get those somewhat evenly spaced. There we go. So now I've got that all the way up towards the front. So I've got my hackle tied in and secured at the back end, and I secured it just with that tinsel itself. And then I'm going to pull my tinsel a little bit forwards towards the eye. My thread is towards the back end of the hook. That means these wraps are going to be going over the top of the tinsel that we just tied in there and securing it into place. Once I've got a few turns like that, I'm going to go ahead and take a few turns over the top of it as well. And we're going to be kind of left with something like that. Can cut off the balance of that tinsel. I have plenty to do another fly. I've done a few already with just that one piece of tinsel. I'm going to come back over the top and make sure I don't have that move anywhere at all. It's also a chance if you've, trapped any hackle fibers to kind of stroke them back a little bit. So we've got our pattern kind of looking like this. I'm going to come in with my scissors now and try to be really careful. I want to cut that extra stem off here at the back. So for this soft hackle here, I'm just going to use an Indian hen in brown. Comes in a patch about like that. I find a feather that is about the size that I want, and I'll remove it from the skin there. I want to get rid of most of the fuzzy pieces here, so I'm going to go ahead and just strip those off by kind of just pinching them and holding that and pulling forward, and you get kind of left with something that's like that. In this case, I'm going to take a little bit more off. And I'm trying to make it so I have about the exact same, so they're at least somewhat even, especially right, let me see if I can find my bodkin here. Right here, where your stem is meeting the feather, you want the fibers on this side to be about the same number of fibers as we have on that side. And with that done, I'm going to go ahead and grab some hackle pliers. I'm going to grab some that are like this. You can use whatever you want to use. And I'm going to try to just barely grab hold of the very middle of this feather. And I can let go like that. You'll wet your fingers and we'll stroke that down. Like that. And that's going to be just perfect. And you'll see when I release my hackle plier now, I have a nice little point to tie in with. So now we're going to use that little piece, and we're going to use it for the tie-in point. So I'm going to bring my thread back just a little bit. Going to hold this away from the shank of the hook just a little, because it's going to hit those fibers that we already tied towards the back end of the hook. And I'm just going to take a couple of good solid wraps here And once I have those wraps in place, I'm gonna just jump in here and we'll cut off that tag end of this hackle. It's kind of like that. I can come on in and clean that up a little bit. Part of what I wanted is to make sure that I've got a fairly smooth area for my soft hackle to go. So we're going to just take the same pliers that we used when we tied the hackle back towards the bend of the hook, and I'm just going to grasp hold of the stem here of this feather. And I don't want to pull it too tight because it'll break, but enough that it's standing up straight. I'm going to wet my fingers a little bit to try to get as many of those fibers pointing backwards as I possibly can. And then I'm just going to start taking wraps up, and it's going to jump around like that on, well, it does on me anyway. That's okay, because I just stroke everything back, including what's already kind of poking out there. And I'm just going to kind of take touching turns, moving up towards the eye. And with each turn, I'm going to stroke everything back that I can. Till we're right about there. Right there, I've got nothing but stem, so that's where I want to tie this one off. Go ahead and tighten up my thread a little bit so it's not hanging out 1.5 feet. And I will go ahead and take some wraps right over the top of that stem, just to make sure we get it nice and secure in place here. I can take a couple of turns on the other side of this as well. With that, I can release my hackle plier and come on in, and we'll just cut the balance of this stem off. And then it's just more or less house cleaning time. I can just stroke these fibers that are coming out over the eye of the hook and pull them backwards. Then we're just going to take wraps right over the top of those. You'll note that that will get them in that backwards trajectory, which is where we want it. I'll clean up that head just a little bit. And with that, we'll go ahead and grab our whip finisher. In this case, I'm using the Loon whip finisher because it's got that kind of the tool to cut my thread. And when you're taking these final wraps here, make sure that you're moving towards the back end of the hook, because you want it thicker towards the back and thinner towards the eye. Go ahead and pull that just like so. I'm going to pull that a little bit tight. Just make sure it's nice and secure. And once I have it nice and secure, I'm just going to come in with this end of my whip finisher and just touch that thread with this piece of metal, and that will break it off. You can hear the mess I got going on here. And there you have it. Great looking fly with a nice brown hackle. I'm going to be looking for some darker, some more bright red colors, and maybe tie some in this way. But here's the Brown Bumble.